Hi everyone, my name is Hans Muehsler and I will be presenting on the Layers of Necessity Instructional Development Model by Tessman and Wedman. First, just a little bit of information about the developers. Martin Tessman, at the time of publication, at the time that the model was created, was an associate professor of instructional design at the University of Colorado in Denver. John Wedman, at the time of the creation of the model, was an associate professor of educational technology at the University of Missouri in Columbia. This Layers of Necessity model was created in 1991, sometimes also known as the Excellence Within Boundaries model. This model was later refined and expanded into the Contextual Layered Instructional Design model in 1995. So first, just a little bit of background. Most models prior to this were very sequential in nature. Each component of these more traditional models is required. And each component only appears once in a model. Okay? And because you have to work in these discrete stages, completely completing each stage of a model and perfectly completing that stage, work is not really reconsidered for the overall task from the model, unless a pilot study warrants reconsideration. Now see, this demonstrates a potential limitation of these more traditional models because they can be very resource and time intensive. They can be very complex, which might be difficult to complete the model in practice. So when would you use this Layers of Necessity model? Well, we use it when we have limited time and resources. So only this, on our first layer, perhaps only the simplest model might be possible. Then if we have more time and more resources, a more complex model might be used. So really, this is just a series of instructional design models, one nested within another. Okay, so we start with a simple design, time and resources permitting, we'll go to a more complex design and keep building out from there. This is sometimes known as the good enough for now model by Tessman and Wedman, or by Wedman and Tessman, as good as it can be within the project's limitations. So the way it works is that you start with a layer or model that best fits the situation, time, and resources. Now, if more time exists after completing some initial layer, then we can go back and add additional design and features, time and resources permitting. In other words, making a more sophisticated model. Okay. Storms and Johnson put it very simply, and I really like the way they did it. The layers model says to go through the tasks, focusing your effort only on what must be done to reach some usable intermediate goal. When that has been completed, then you go around again, only this time focusing on a longer-term goal, and so forth. So this is really more of a practitioner's model. So you select a model and action that will get the job done and do it well. Now that model must be matched with the goals of the project. Now this is admittedly, and as Tessman and Wedman admitted, this might not necessarily be the most optimal, but it is practical. And again, building to more sophisticated designs. Sometimes a diagram helps us understand things better, and that's what this is. So if we have a very severe time and resource limitations, we'll only work with this first layer. A very simple model just to that will do the job and do the job well. If there's more time, then we'll proceed to further layers, okay? Adding complexity to the instructional design process. Okay. So Tessman and Wedman's model does have some advantages, and I'm going to start first by comparing to traditional models. In traditional models, Each step must be completed, and the entire model must be completed in order to complete the entire design task. The layers of necessity model, in contrast, says that if there is enough time and resources, if there are enough time and resources available, then go ahead and add another layer. You can make the design better with more complex activities and tasks. So in other words, Tessman and Wedman's model is designed with improvements in mind. Another advantage over traditional models is procedure-based versus principle-designed. In the traditional models, it's very procedural. So you work your way through the model, going from one step to the next to the next. This is sometimes called the waterfall method, where you must complete an entire stage before going on to the next stage. And these stages must be completed in order. The layers of necessity model, though, emphasize the principles of design, not the procedures of design. The authors lay out two main principles: a layer selection principle, where we are selecting activities that are most appropriate for the task. They're saying that precision of the design activity depends on the ease of completing that activity. So in other words, a few goals might be less precise, but it could be more appropriate for the task if we can't complete a more lengthy list. The other principle is this layer of implementation principle. In other words, the output of the activity should be consistent with each other. In other words, the different activities should all reach to about the same depth of understanding and the depth of what they want people to do. Okay, so the practice must be consistent with the learning objectives. So whatever you're going to ask the learners to do must be consistent with the objectives for the course. Another advantage is discrete stages versus merged stages. In the traditional models, each stage has a name, and you keep working at that stage and don't leave that stage until it's complete. The layers of necessity model, though, looks at each layer. Each layer of the model is important. The Tessman and Wedman's model looks at layers not by type of task, but rather complexity of the task that they're asking people to do. And complexity of the task that needs to be done in order to complete the goal. Another comparison is comprehensive versus opportunistic. In traditional methods, all components are completed in order. We can't minimize any of the parts to these traditional models. We can't delete any. All must be completed sequentially. Layers of necessity model, though, says that components of the model can be minimized. They can be deleted. That's okay. All parameters are adjustable depending on the time and resources available. Another comparison, effectiveness versus efficiency. Traditional models can be may result in very, very effective instruction, which is good, but they can also be very time and resource intensive because each component must be thoroughly accomplished before moving on to the next. Layers of necessity, though, says that the layers are chosen based on constraints. In other words, the models that they'll employ for each layer are based on the constraints. So you choose activities that best fit within those time and resources in order to do the job efficiently but still produce a quality product. A couple other advantages is that the layered model has enhancement built in. So we know going in that we're going to be going back and we're going to be improving the model, making it even better, improving the task. Traditional models don't even imply that this is going to be a possibility because we've completed all the steps very thoroughly and as perfect as we possibly can, so there's no need to revisit the product. Okay? But layered models allow for that. It's a much more intuitive approach, much more like how the instructional design is done in practice. There are a few disadvantages though. Okay, this layers of necessity model is more appropriate more for expert level instructional designers because experts know what can be cut out of these different models, when you can cut corners. So that makes this model at a bit of a disadvantage for novices, okay, because they just don't have that experience or intuition. And this model, as authors state, is really not appropriate for teachers. Teachers need a more novice instructional design model, but not relying so heavily on a systematic approach. Some authors suggest Gerlach and Ely might be more appropriate. Description of instructional design is not very specific because we're picking and choosing the different designs as we go through and expanding and minimizing some of these different parts. Now this may potentially result in a poor product, which is why the various authors are saying leave this layers of necessity model more to the experts. Just as an example, Storms and Johnson worked on this project for the gas company and Pacific Enterprises when they restructured and downsized. Now this had a huge impact and an increasing impact on the training because now teams were cross-functioning, had multiple roles. So this instructional design team had to go through, tear apart, reassemble courses that were taught by over 30 instructors over many, many years. Over 1,000 modules were eliminated. Each of these modules might be at least 5 hours long. It was estimated that it might take 7 years to redevelop everything. The managers felt that the instructional design is just going to be too long, too costly, because they also wanted testing for understanding as well. Well, Storms and Johnson used this layers of necessity model and found that these different time and resource barriers were dramatically reduced because they did what they could with the time and resources allotted. This also allowed for a much longer term perspective that they know that they're going to keep coming back and refining as they go. So they're investing as little as necessary in order to get the objectives done and done well. So that resulted in good communications with the stakeholders. Here's a picture of their model. So they started with the transition training, which was initially needed immediately, and then they were able to move on to more complex models for promotional training, and then even more complex models for a complete training system. I won't go through, this is from Storms and Johnson's work, and I'm not going to go through all of this, but it is available if you want to see how they used this layers of necessity. And my work cited, and I hope that this presentation was useful for you, and I look forward to hearing your comments. Thank you very much.